Hello! Why don't you take a seat and tell me what appears to be the problem? Let's have another consult the doctor. I'm going to start straight off with question number 1, and I'm writing down timestamps as we speak with my Enso Puma pocket pen, which is a very comfortable pen. Okay, let's not waste any time. Already wasted 25 seconds, now 26, now 27. Now, okay. I have an St. Dupont that is so dry, it requires incredibly wet inks, and it does therefore really show off the properties of those inks. Should I tune it, or should I keep it as is? Pizzazz! I think that is a question that is a very interesting question. And my answer would be clear. I would always, and I cannot emphasize this enough, if you have any type of pen that you like, but you don't really like the way it writes, but you just love that pen, get it tuned by a nib meister. It is these people's jobs to do so. It is their livelihood and income. And the reality is you will be able, if you go to an adequate nib meister, to transform a pen that you love the looks of but that doesn't really write properly to a pen that you love the looks of and that writes perfectly. I think it is very important to not underestimate that effect. I have had definitely not all my pens, but I have some of my pens that had issues tuned by a nib meister, all kinds of people. Many cases Mike Masayama, but there was also a local nib meister in the Calgary Pen Club who is very good at what he does, and every time I end up with a nib that writes beautifully. Again, you should not underestimate what an effect that has on your pen and how much nicer it becomes to write with that pen. And I would personally rather have 4 pens with properly tuned nibs that write like a dream than 40 pens with nibs, half of which I don't like, 25% sometimes right, sometimes don't, and maybe 25% right okay. That's just me, but that's what I would do. As to the nib showing off the properties of an ink, when properly tuned, it should still do that, right? If anything, it's going to be made wetter because it's dry, so it may even do that to a larger extent. So I would not wait any longer. I would just get it done straight away. Okay, next question. This is I think a slightly more extensive question, but an interesting one. How do you deal with inks that dry on an uncapped nib really quickly? So in other words, if you're doing what I shall now simulate, you're sitting around with your pen uncapped and then you try to write and the nib has run dry. I have tried different nibs, such as broader nibs or finer nibs. I've tried diluting ink, but then the ink kind of loses its appeal to me. Kudos for using the experimental method and isolating every factor one by one, nibs and inks and all that, because that's the way to figure out what's going on. In a nutshell, I think there may be a couple of factors here, some of which within your control, some of them not within your control. If you happen to live in a particularly dry climate or a particularly hot climate, in my experience, this happens more easily, especially if it's very dry. I live in a pretty dry area now, and in certain pens that really makes a difference. I can feel the difference. Another factor that comes into play is that some pens do it more than others. For example, I have a classic Pens LM1. I forgot to take it out, but the nib assembly is such that the nib and feed are quite open. I don't really know how to explain it better, but it's a very round nib and it sticks out. Feed, and it sticks out quite far. That thing dries out. It dries out quickly. Give it half a minute or a minute uncapped, and it'll likely hard start. Now I had something done to that nib, so the problem is mitigated a little bit, but still, it kind of does that. It's the way the nib was built. I bought it from the great Sarge Minhas, and he warned me as he sold it to me, like, look, man, this is what it's like. And he was right. I'm not really bothered by it. because I know and I have accepted that for that pen, that's the way it is. Period. So it may vary a bit from pen to pen. Some pens have that more open construction, and I don't know how to explain it better than that, but some pens just have that. They have a lot of the feed sticking out, or a very exposed nib, or something like that. And of course, an important factor, because you can't control your climate, you can't control the pen. Again, some pens will do it more than others. And the ink matters. Some inks are very wet or lubricated. I have this problem a lot less with certain Iroshizuku inks. Konpeki, for example, is a super wet ink. That doesn't dry up on my nibs, really, unless I really leave a pen uncapped for a very, very, very long time. So the type of ink does matter, and it does have an effect on this specific issue. I also think that this is a bit of an issue with fountain pens. Again, some will do it more than others, so that takes some experimentation. I'm leaving this uncapped. I've left it uncapped since I wrote with it, so I just want to see what happens when I've been talking for a couple minutes. Some pens do this. The reality is, and this is not me trying to be flippant or annoying, but you can always use a pencil, and a pencil will always write straight away. It doesn't hard start, it doesn't skip. But that's not for everyone, it's not for me. But I have accepted that when it comes to fountain pens, in some of these cases, it's the way it is. And that's, so I cap them. Or even, and I don't know to what extent that makes sense to everyone. This started up straight away, by the way. It was a little dryish, but it did start up. What I have also found is that if I'm in a situation, for example, a meeting, where I am taking notes, but not all the time, for example, because I am talking or I don't have to take notes of that specific part, what I often do is I don't cap the pen, I just put it down, and I just put the cap on without actually putting it on. In this case, it's a screw-on cap. I don't screw it on. I just put the cap on and I put it down. You can even hold it that way, but I put it down. You're going to make a mistake a couple times and try to uncap it or pick it up, and the cap falls off, but after a couple times you get used to it, and then at least the cap is in a situation where it is less exposed to the air, and I found that helps. That helps me a lot. So I don't know if that's a useful suggestion to you, but that has definitely made a difference for me. The same person also asked, and I'm paraphrasing, but speaking of which, how do you dilute inks? Because he mentioned that, right? That he has diluted inks, but then the ink lose their appeal. So how do you do it? What kind of tools do you use? Let me say this about that, and I'm taking a sip, sorry. When it comes to I'm going to unceremoniously call this fiddling with ink. My very short answer is I don't. Once upon a time, when I was really getting started with fountain pens, I bought the entire set of platinum mix-free inks. These are inks that are meant to be mixed. They come with little mixing, the whole set came with mixing bottles and an eyedropper and eyedroppers, and there was even a diluting fluid. I don't know what was in it. I don't know what was the diluting fluid. I don't know if that was basically just a bottle of water or if it was some sort of alcohol or whatever. I simply don't know. I don't know what it was. But that made definitely diluted inks. The simplest way to dilute is just that. You add a bit of water, right? Because then you have a higher ratio of water to dye and will be diluted. I don't do it, really. I don't mix inks and I don't dilute inks. Why not? For two reasons. Reason number one, I am, I think, conservative in one area of my life, and that is the use of inks. I have some pens that are very dear to me and that in some cases were expensive. In a couple of cases were very expensive. I would prefer not to put crappy ink in those pens. So I am very conservative. I've said this a couple times before, and I will gladly say this again. I stick to specific ink manufacturers. Iroshizuku, no specific order, Montblanc, Waterman, Diamine, and that's it, period. I hardly ever use an ink of a different brand. I sometimes use some Leonardo, but I've had good experiences with that. That's it. I don't use any real boutique inks. I don't use Noodlers. I don't use Private Reserve. I have in the past. I don't anymore. Period. Because I don't know what's in them. And there are a lot of reports online. People have had molten feeds with Noodlers, with Private Reserve. Not all Noodlers. I say again, because otherwise half the world explodes. I'm sure that many Noodlers inks are perfectly safe, and the same thing for Private Reserve. But if some are not, I don't know. I'm not going to play Russian roulette with my pens. I just don't. Now, certain inks are not meant to be mixed. I know, for example, certain Noodlers inks come with the warning, do not mix this with other inks. Which, for me, raises a couple of questions about what's going on with that ink then. But having said that, I'm not trying to bash Noodlers here. Why mix stuff? Now, for some people, I understand that is fun. It is fun to mix inks to create new colors. But given that there are hundreds of inks out there, you can probably find that color. Now, again, I understand. For some people, that is the juice. That's what they love to do. They like to mix colors and find their exact right shade. That's fine. SBRE Brown is the only ink you need anyway. But I mean, I understand. I understand the point that you can derive fun from mixing inks and getting interesting colors. But for me, that's not fun. Others should do whatever they want, but for me, that's not fun. So I don't derive pleasure from doing so. It's the same thing with diluting inks. I don't mess with the inks because I don't know what happens. Now, if you add water to an ink, if anything, it's going to get safer, I suppose, because it's just going to get diluted and less concentrated. That's literally the definition of diluted. Anyway, that's why I don't see the point. Now, if you were to do it, I suppose water is safe. I mean, what can happen to an ink if you put a little bit of water in? You dilute it a bit and that's it. But you can also look at something like that platinum mix-free stuff, and maybe you can buy that dilution stuff separately. I don't know. Again, I don't know what's in it either. Maybe just buying a bottle of water. I don't know. I doubt it, but that's an option. I think I've covered this topic to death, so I shall now do you all a favor and move on. But these are just some thoughts. You asked, you get my thoughts. Okay, what's the final question that I have? I thought this was an interesting question because it was somewhat out of the box. At this moment, what to you is the funniest thing about the fountain pen world? I can mention two things. I find fountain pen... No, I can't speak. I find Penboy Roy funny. I find him funny because he has a good sense of humor. His reviews are to the point and not full of blabbering. Right. That I'm not insecure about that. No, but I mean, I really like that. He's very much to the point. And again, he also presents material in a way that I find often comical and funny, and I really like that. What I find funny, and this I'm very careful how I express that, but what I find funny is people who take fountain pens incredibly seriously, and some people should. If you have a collection of solid gold Watermans that are $20,000 a piece, you probably should take that collection very seriously. But I think for most of us, it should not be taken that seriously. We allocate so much seriousness to something that should be fun, and then we get very worked up over things like, well, this ink is good and this ink is bad. I know I just did that. That's why I give this example on purpose. Or well, this company is good and this is bad and this is all terrible and how this happened. And sometimes when you see discussion threads of people online, I'm not talking about my channel, but I mean on Fountain Pen Network, for example, people have incredibly intricate discussions about things that really don't matter that much. And that's not at all meant as an insult. I think it is wonderful that we can enjoy this hobby, and everyone does that in the way that fits them best. But for me to take these kinds of matters so incredibly seriously while you're just talking about pens is kind of comical, and that's why I find it very important for me, and I think that's also why Penboy Roy's videos appeal to me. I find it very important to also have fun, and I think reviews should be fun, and there should be a little bit of comedy to them. And some people hate that, and those are the people who take this super seriously. But I have the feeling a lot of people appreciate it because, again, you're talking about something that really is a very weird hobby. We spend hundreds of dollars, sometimes thousands of dollars on a pen. You can also buy like a 10-pack of big crystals for $1 at Staples, so to speak. So we are in a very special niche, and it's an interesting niche, and I've met wonderful people through that niche. But I sometimes find it comical how incredibly seriously people take that. And if I may give one example, I remember that at some point, I think it was on Reddit, there was some sort of thread about me. There are a few. I know that, but it was something along the lines, may have been found up on network. Anyway, that doesn't matter. What matters is there was some sort of comment from someone who had measured a pen, and the measurements on my site were something like a millimeter off. Now, I mean, I use digital calipers, but I mean, it's also a matter of where exactly do you put them on the pen, etc. I mean, I try to do what I can, but it's a lot of work. The measuring is mind-numbing work, right? If I have recorded, and that happens in weekends, 5 or 6 or 7 reviews, I have to measure every pen. So I measure it capped, and I measure it uncapped, and I measure it posted, and I measure the section diameter at the narrowest point and at the widest point, and the barrel at the narrowest point and at the widest point, and I have to do that in both millimeters and in inches, and then I have to weigh the pen with the cap, and just the pen and just the cap, and you do that 5 or 6 or 7 times in a row. It is spirit crushing. It's not a fun thing to me, but I know that people appreciate that, so I do that. But then the whole thread, oh my god, oh no, it was a millimeter off, and now he wondered how off the other measurements on my site were. It's a millimeter. You're not going to feel the difference. You will not feel the difference in length of a millimeter. Maybe if you're talking about the grip section of a pen, you will feel a difference of 3 millimeters because it becomes a bit wider and girthier. But for that length, it doesn't matter. I'm trying to do this as well as I can, but that's the limit, right? Like I can do what I can do, and that's pretty much it. I'm not upset. I'm not angry about it, but that I think is comical, that we are so serious about this pen that is actually 151.3 millimeters, and I put it down for 150.3. Well, that's just messed up, man. So anyway, there is that. I hope this was useful. I don't want to keep you here forever, so talk amongst yourselves. I will see you next time. Please leave any other questions for the doctor below. Bye!